Hey there. I'm John. I'll be debating Casey Push, Casey the car guy, and today we're going to be talking Casey versus the commies when push comes to shove.
This is great.
All
This
right.
is like generations in the making, baby. Thanks for having me back on. I frankly didn't realize your affinity toward communist ideals until after we had our conversation before in podcast. And I was kind of like, whoa. And then I thought about it for a minute. I'm like, no, we have to talk about this.
Yep. Well, I know there's the ACP link. I'm just here representing
Which, to
kind
be
of my own
perfectly
views
honest,
today.
yeah, and when I saw ACP and you sent me that, like I was thinking, this is a car podcast, right? And ACP, you mean like 380 or 45? I didn't even know. I didn't even know. So here we are. I'm looking forward because you're a super history buff and nerd, and you're sharing ideals of your interest that I don't. But let's talk about them.
Sure. One of the things that often gets overlooked is that at least the particular variety of communism I'm coming from is Marxism-Leninism. So basically, dialectical materialism and historical materialism, respect for history, respect for culture, respect for civilization, family, and ideals. People who sacrifice themselves with the future of their community in mind, but also an idea of where they're coming from. That's basically what you're already doing, Casey.
I think that's every man, woman, child on the planet. We all care about, our life and lineage and where we came from and hopefully our community. So I
Well,
think
that's
that what you said there
the
is
now the people
universal.
who are running our current order into the ground are not, let's just say.
I agree with you
Well,
on that
uh,
point. Also, somebody's going to take that out of context.
yeah.
Let them, screw them. Let them. Let's keep
Well,
going.
they can
This is
deep
fun.
fake us anyway, so
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Oh, or just lawfare us into oblivion.
yep. Well, another point might be what exact what exactly is the difference between left and right? That's been debated throughout history, but I know it goes back to the French Revolution. But what's your take on it?
Well, first of all, I was thinking today that I hate just thinking left and right because that is literally one dimensional. It's a line, one way or the other. And and I'm not taking anything away from your statement, just in general, especially us caught up with that in the United States. Stupid. It's stupid. Um, it's funny. I have to mention this. When you said that, I thought of a joke that someone told me. They go, if you go far enough left, you get your guns back. And I laughed at that because it's dark humor. I'm like, wow, I'm going to remember that. But anyway,
I guess
I
that
don't
joke's
like the
loaded.
left. What's that?
I guess that joke's loaded.
You are the best with dad jokes. Um, no, I just don't like the left-right discussion. At times it makes sense, but it's also a way to just keep people down and controlled and fighting. I have found, especially with my political crash out videos, where I'm like, that's it. The left and right are both getting lit up, and then I just speak with independent thought and people in mind, history in the future and everybody's best interest. And the next thing you know, you get people from both sides of the aisle and agreeing and following and talking and versing. So I think the most important thing is independent thought with is in the best interest of everybody together, and that's where I'm coming from when I assess, what I think are intelligent actions or policies or positions. But I also weigh that with knowledge of how human nature actually is, and that this isn't Star Trek. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
because utopianism is one of the big problems of prior communist movements. And quite frankly, a lot of the people who call themselves communists nowadays are just basically just liberals or neoliberals who like stealing it for shock value.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I think those statements are accurate, and I think the place where it breaks down, especially with young people that get into a political movement or things in the past, they haven't been around the sun enough times to really know human nature beyond just their own wherever it is that they live. And especially if you've only been in the United States in one socioeconomic class, you've never traveled, you've never been around, you've never gotten completely screwed by people or seen absolute acts of generosity and kindness. If you haven't seen everything, then you're prone to being idealistic and forgetting human nature.
Yep. Because idealism, at least the capital I German idealism, that's kind of one of the inspirations for Hegel and eventually Marx. But one of the things about Marx is that he tried to go towards the material side. But one thing that's often overlooked is that Marx kind of critiques what he calls unproductive labor versus productive labor. You yourself mentioned that toolboxes produce value, which is basically the same thing. I know
Yeah,
that,
my computer is sitting on my toolbox and I'm leaning up against some drawers.
yeah, but getting back to it, that's kind of why, like, unproductive labor, not in the sense of moralism, but something like the menial service sector jobs, like uh, Starbucks baristas or service sector stuff,
Sure.
that might be essentially relying on the excess of finance capital per se, as opposed to like a factory worker or a trucker or a farmer who's actually out there fixing something, transporting something, transforming a material into a product.
Indeed. And you know, where you're going with this at the moment, I think, as it relates, and perhaps this is a great lead in, something I've been seeing with the tech bros like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Sam Altman is that, you know, if AI takes away a job, was it really a worthwhile job anyway? And then they talk about how with AI, with so many people not working, then we can all basically just be rich and then, you know, do the nice things we're going to do. And I foresee them trying to push universal basic income when they kind of tank the entire nature of industry and the economy with it, kind of whether we like it or not. And, you know, their point philosophically or theoretically has got a great point. And hypothetically, you know, if you had a smaller community that was benevolent toward each other, you would have a better chance at, if you didn't have to work, then we can all share and then pursue something higher: art, philosophy, theology, spirituality, exploration, just learning, you know, all those great things. And sometimes you see that kind of episodes or movies of Star Trek where there were people that got to that point. But the problem is, most especially when we're talking a country or many nations, yeah, we're not all in the same place. And that's not going to happen because of human nature. And with what Elon's talking about, with people not having to work and us being rich and kind of universal basic income, I'm like, dude, you're just the new Marx. Like, this is just old communist stuff. It didn't effing work then, and it's not going to now. And like, there are so many things that would have to be done because there's just no way. There's no way these tech bros are going to make this work properly. And I'm just going to be honest. Part of the basic reason it's not going to work, they would have to kill me and millions of other people like me because we know it's not going to effing work. We don't trust them to lead us, and piss off. You can pry all this stuff out of my cold dead hands because I know what human nature is, and you can F right off. I hope that's not going too hard for your channel.
Nope, that's
I
fine.
self censored.
One thing I kind of push back. I agree with the tech bros, but essentially, even Marx and Engels pointed out that even though they kind of say that there is kind of the general utopianism as a potential end goal for communism, it is essentially just the iterative change of what came before. Because even the frickin' Communist Manifesto is written with the context of the specific 1850s, ill-fated 1840s politics in mind. You have to respond to the condition as is. Even Lenin says, when you do not work, you do not eat. So essentially, human nature is still something that we have to account for, and low commodity prices, advancing the productive forces, is the genuine way to do it, not just with tech utopianism like all the tech bros are pushing, but essentially, if everyone had something like a super 3D printer or a Star Trek replicator in their house, that would be far more democratizing than, say, a bunch of the tech bros building data centers everywhere or bullshit like that.
Well, in a sense, but in a sense, if we use that point relating to Star Trek, which is always good for hypothetical. So if we had replicators and such, and you didn't have to make money and such, the thing that ideal, then oh, hey, we could all explore the stars together and come together. But then that requires a special leadership that human nature really hasn't evolved well enough to. Because the fact of the matter is, this was Star Trek. Everybody would just be fat, lazy, in like Wally fat
Pretty
floaty
much.
chairs, and you know, like shagging on the holodeck. I mean, you know, and sadly, and then there would be the few people that have evolved beyond that to go do something, and then those people would end up owning everybody else who didn't. So that's kind of the breakdown there. But another point you mentioned was you were saying Marx had mentioned that if you do not work, you don't eat, right?
That was a Lenin quote.
Lenin, forgive me. You know, and this is gonna get we're gonna dive right into it here. Let me take a sip of water before I do this. So there was this old Uncle Addy who was a painter somewhere around Bavaria, Germany, and Austria in the 20s and 30s that kicked out the banks and got rid of debt in a way to where, if I'm not mistaken, the financial backing of Germany in the 30s was like labor backed. So that had to do with the structure of how they positioned themselves as an industrial powerhouse and engineers and building, which in a fascist way, I would say would reflect to what you mentioned Lenin said, if you don't work, you don't eat back then, in a different way of like, we're going to have prosperity and back our so-called currency or wealth on us coming together to work, create, build, and engineer. Would you say that there's a parallel there at least?
Well, I would say that the rhetoric of what you said about Addy, it does not match the reality. I'm happy to. I actually got some.
Fair. I mean, that's fair with Marx and Lenin, though, too.
No,
But
all ideals, of course, have to be tested against the Western of reality and how they are implemented in a particular historical milieu, right?
yeah, I mean, that's right. All ideals have to do with how they are implemented by who, in what positioning, at what time in history.
So a
Yes,
lot of the
that's a
ideas
matter of
of
fact.
Addy, shall we say, a lot of them he got from Mr. Mussolini.
Is it interesting that we can't even say his name, even though he killed a whole lot less people than communism is responsible for?
I would disagree with that because who wrote the
Would you?
books on communism? But anyway, let's go back to this is what
Who
actually
wrote
one of
the
my
books
favorite
on
tangents.
Germany?
So
Okay, anyway.
where did the Treaty of Versailles where did all the where did those war debts go for? Who by whom?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. So, okay, you said where did they go for, but by whom? What do you mean specifically?
Sure. Obviously, Germany had to repay Britain and France and the Allies a lot of freaking money, right? So
We're
what
getting into
happened?
conversations that are going to get us canceled there, sir.
Yep. So
Um, Tell you what, before we answer that question, or if we consider we want to answer that question, maybe let's move past that point and go to where you wanted to go with this before we
sure.
get
The
ourselves in
short
big
version is
trouble.
that it actually has to do with actually some work by a guy named Professor Michael Hudson, one of my favorite economists. He actually had the idea is that the Germans had to print a lot of money for Britain and France. And after the end of World War One, the Americans during the war lent a lot of money to the British and the French. The British and the French kind of assumed the Americans would cancel the debt, just like Britain did at the end of the Napoleonic Wars towards their allies. The U.S. did not, so the U.S. basically gets money from the British and the French, and they lend money to the Reichsbank, and that's basically printing a lot more money that they pay to the British and the French to try and get rid of their debt through inflation. And that kind of creates a giant way to create demand for dollars leading up to the war. I know we've talked about how, or at least,
It's a big, stupid, disgusting game, isn't it?
yes,
Where there's nothing different about any of the countries. Sure, some of them have to rebuild after a war physically, but the people are still there. They're still smart. They still want to work and they can still create. But we're all playing this sick, disgusting world game with debt and currency that ends up just screwing like one nation or people at different times in history, which you're going to love this because that just holds everybody back.
yep, because debt is kind of the millstone around the neck of civilizations.
Um, Millstone, what do you mean by that?
The giant millstone, like a giant frickin' stone for grinding grain in an ancient mill.
Yes, but debt. Say that again. So debt is the millstone
Debt
for
can
what
be a
again?
millstone for civilization because it enforces like a landlord-esque system, a rentier system, a rent
I
seeking
consider
system.
it shackles to civilization.
Pretty much same
Ball and
thing.
chain. Yeah.
But
Um,
uh, the thing I bring back is this is where we're going back a couple thousand
so what's
years.
worse, the ball and chain or the hammer and sickle?
Well, that's something we'll discuss. But this brings us to our other another star of today's conversation. I hope we'll go back to the
Yes.
Roman Empire and Jesus. So
Well, this is going to be so much fun. I love this. Can I just pause and say, let's just let's take a moment to acknowledge ourselves being in this moment. I'm enjoying being here because nobody has conversations like this anymore. Do they?
no,
That are civil?
well, keep in mind, even Ernest Thälmann, if you know who he was, he would debate the Nazis in public.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? I have another question on that. Why does something have to be a debate?
Well,
Because a debate is effectively combative where there's supposed to be a winner and a loser, right?
I prefer a term dialogue as opposed to just outright debate. It's not like it's
I
a
would
college
prefer
debate team.
I would prefer structured conversation because a
Mhm.
structured conversation, whether it gets heated or not or anything, that allows people to walk away from it and then think and marinate on it and decide if their views they feel more strongly about them or if maybe in some way they evolve or change. And I think that's a lot better than a debate because it's effectively like what is a debate? Like, the fact that we do political debates and stuff, they're stupid. They're all stupid. Um, because I don't think we're growing from them. I think we just stay in this dumb, unsportsmanlike college football rivalry, unsportsmanlike. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
like a lot of
I
high
just,
school and college debates are literally like a team sport. It's like debate team one and debate team two.
yeah. Why can't people just have conversations? Okay, enough of my silly sidebar. You
All
were
right.
saying,
Well, getting back to like the Roman Empire, the Romans kind
oh,
of
Roman Empire, Jesus.
yeah. So basically, the Romans they had a lot of debt from their civil wars. They were because a lot of their different noble families, that the patricians, basically during the end of the Republic, kind of had a lot of instability, to put it mildly. One of the reasons that Augustus became imperator is basically to enforce debt payments by extracting money from all the outlying provinces. That's why a lot of the tax collectors were basically thugs who go around beating the crap out of people. And we have Jesus kind of pointing this
Where's
out.
my money?
Yeah. Well, the Romans kind of learned this from their Greek tutors, and the Greeks, because the Peloponnesian Wars between Athens and Sparta ended up just creating debt oligarchies in the Greek city-states. They
Yeah,
before then, in the Bronze Age, before the Bronze Age collapse in the 12th century or so, the Sea Peoples, the Hyksos, the Philistines, as we know them in the Old Testament, there used to be the tradition of jubilees in many of the Middle Eastern kingdoms, like canceling the debt a certain number of years before you basically have like everything crash economically, kind of at where we are right now. So in the Old Testament, I think it was 49 years for for the Jewish kingdom, the Israelis back then. Whereas like the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, and I think like the Babylonians all had their own debt
sure.
jubilees at not sure if they're regular or they'd be more situational, but it kind of would be a way of systematically resetting the economic thing so speculative debts didn't overrun the real economy. But after the Bronze Age collapse, that tradition was largely ignored or forgotten conveniently because the Greek city-states largely relied on that to finance essentially wars and expeditions.
The
So
debt.
yep. Keep in mind, one of the great statesmen of ancient Athens, Solon, was kind of considered the father of democracy in a lot of ways. He kind of ended debt slavery as his most famous policy. You can see him on the Supreme Court next to two other figures. You know who they are?
No.
There's Moses, of course, the lawgiver. And you know who number three is? Someone who was a big philosopher that Ben Franklin really liked in particular, Confucius.
Oh, that's interesting. So, okay. Hi, hi. Okay, I have to go. Daddy has to go. Okay. But it's like that famous video where a guy's doing an interview and the little ones come in from the back. Okay, so an interesting thing. So civilization through the ages, you mentioned the Greeks, the Romans, etc., and debt, and the history of debt,
Yep.
and how it pertains to wars. So, what is currency? It's a method of tracking the value people have done. Okay, money itself doesn't exist. Paper is a currency note that what used to be gold backed, and now it's not backed by squat. Other than like we're the government, we're real cool. Well, they're not. Anyway, it's paper. Okay, you can light it on fire. It's not really worth anything. You can't eat it. But the point is, it tracks hypothetically a value. It represents a power that you get from either trading goods or services, etc. Now, that's all well and good, and that's great because that tracks what people do, and you're supposed to work and provide value and goods. But with any civilization, there are people that will find ways to circumvent the good nature of it and take advantage. And effectively, debt and debt slavery and usury, et cetera, whatever you want to call it, is just that. That's a way to use the structure of society against itself to get ahead without actually providing value to society. And then you mentioned another point relating to wars and debt. That's probably the largest manifestation of that because war is, in a sense, sick and it's a power move, period. So if you're using debt to fund wars, all you're doing is shortchanging and cheating society and the good nature of it to destroy to gain more power.
Yep.
So
So
I
that's
would
why
go so far.
economic overextension and financial overextension and military overextension have long gone hand in hand.
It's all sick. Yeah, it's all sick. No, it really is philosophically. That anybody can say that, and anybody who doesn't is sick and hasn't thought about it. It needs to be reined back into actually being a human in a civilization or community.
Well, that's why getting back to our friend Jesus, what one of the things he was saying in Matthew chapters 5 through 7 in the Sermon on the Mount, you know what he's trying to bring back? The Jubilee.
In what sense do you mean?
Well, restoring the Jubilee as a method of debt repayment, because otherwise the Roman governor of what is then Palestine could basically would basically have to F off and stop stealing money from all the downtrodden conquered peoples and their collaborator classes. So one of the reasons that they would have hated Jesus is because he's basically saying back then it's the Pharisees and all them who are virtue signaling weirdos in league with the Romans. And if Jesus stops, and if people stop paying the debt, or essentially an illegal debt imposed upon them by the Romans, at least from one perspective, then of course that would set a precedent that would not look good for the empire. So that's why the economic effect of early Christianity and the early church lived in communes effectively and canceled debt and avoided it to the best of their abilities. So Christianity was essentially the forerunner of a lot of let's just say
Come
that
on, say the one liner I know you want to.
Jesus was the first communist.
There you go. Was that?
Well,
I mean, you have a philosophical point. Um, you have a philosophical point. I, however, I don't like to make those comparisons uh, too much. You
it's a
know,
good clickbaity one. Yeah, I know.
it's a good clickbaity one, and it's a good food for thought to effectively kind of shock somebody briefly, only for the standpoint of getting to people to look at things from different perspectives, which is valuable. But with regard to making that statement, I see people, I don't want to say go wrong, but take it too far. Because then they say, well, this is this and this is this, so it must be this. It's like, no, 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 calm down, calm down. Let's just give consideration to many things. The difficulty is, and the other difficulty with this is, so if I want to look at Jesus as a figure and what he would preach and embody and live, um, if I even bring that up, then people will initially argue against religion and theology and Christianity, et cetera. So for the sake of me talking now, let's look at this from an objective, universal theologically. Let's just admit there is a figure of Jesus that had certain ideals. And I think everybody can do that regardless of your own personal beliefs. And then let's consider communism is in fact a structure that has ideals, okay, regardless of what you believe. So let's just think about that. Yeah, there's similarities. Um, However, I'm gonna use my old kind of hillbilly down talk like this. Is the problem was, if you want to look at Jesus as a spiritual figure, Christianity having godly like powers, that is above that of man, which does a poor job of ruling themselves. And the communists, last time I checked, they're all men. And the problem when men try to impart something that is hypothetically or philosophically perfect ain't gonna work in a perfect world. That's why communism don't work in an imperfect world.
Well, even if we assume
That
that
makes sense. That was
I
really
can
hard to
follow,
handle.
yeah, I like the
It wasn't
accent,
too cringy.
but let's just
Yeah, well,
let's just go with the idea that all built by man will fall, right? Every utopian idea, it still
sure.
materially can improve people's living standards, even if the system all systems made by humanity are doomed to fail. I mean, today
Well,
the
he
Russian
okay.
the Russians have gone from a feudal backwater to essentially an industrial and atomic superpower. The Chinese are now the leading industrial power in the world thanks to mass production of industry.
Yeah, but to what cost? Is there any individuality worth a darn in China?
There is, but keep in mind they've always been a much more communal culture than we are.
Yeah, so here I okay, so let's do may we shift gears slightly? May I just for a
Yep, you are
second
the car
grab
guy, so
grab the steering wheel here? So I went to the site you were speaking of, like ACP, right? You sent me a thing based upon the program. And you've got things here. I'm just going to do some bullet points. Cancellation of all debts, abolish the Federal Reserve. This is where people are going to soundbite me, by the way. Um, so it goes on economy, land, agriculture, housing reform. Let me keep going down here. Industrial policy, energy and infrastructure, healthcare, social media reform, standardization, weights and measures. Here, abolition of intellectual property. This is where I think it's interesting. So it's saying an abolition of software patents and IP-based software monopolies in favor of a universal program for open source software technology. Okay, that's a thing. We'll come back to that. They stand for dismantling and investigation into corrupt and criminal practices in entertainment music industries. That's a thing. We'll come back to it. Stands for universal and free access to published scientific, cultural, and academic materials. Fine. Those are all fine things. Now, let me ask you this, since you sent this to me and know better. Where do they all stand with um, individuals and businesses, the ownership of, shall we say, private property?
well, private property in the sense of like a technical patent, like someone invents a new type of engine and patents
No, like
that.
physical stuff, as an example.
Sure. Keep in mind, I know this might be a point of contention, but China does have a patent system that allows individual inventors and companies to own patents for a time. It's just that they can't do what's called patent trolling over here, where companies stockpile patents like they're nuclear warheads and sue the pants
Yes.
off of anyone who actually wants to do anything productive with them, like build them.
Well, we can come back to that because we all know Big Pharma does the same thing. But
Yep.
no, I wanted to ask you relating to your beliefs on that. Is there, how are you on the like private property in terms of like
Well, private property
homes
in
and
the case of
lands and stuff?
well, in the case of you have a house, you have a car, that's fine. That's personal property. I'd like to point a distinction between the Marxist definition of private property. I know it often gets abused or used depending on your perspective, but it often refers to the more speculative assets in capital, like derivatives, stuff like that, credit, stuff that is generally, we think, better off managed by a public central bank as opposed to BlackRock and Vanguard and their little satanic spawn.
Yeah.
So personal
Well,
property,
so
though, like if you
yes,
can have
personal
a
property.
house, you can have a car, you can have a pile of guns, whatever.
So, okay, I have a question though. Where, with regard to, because am I correct to assume that your personal beliefs resonate with what you sent me of ACP
Yeah,
here? Okay, that's fine. I'm in no way attacking. But my curiosity is where, because hypothetically, to have these beliefs and have a say a nation or a world that embodies them, you would have to have some kind of overseeing body or governing body of some kind. Would you not
you
have
would,
some
but we
kind of
already
lead?
have that to a degree. Every government will do that to some extent,
Yes, of
even if
course.
it's
And I'm
just
not
laissez-faire corporatism or laissez-faire
right.
markets.
So my question is, in a hypothetical, these things in general, for what I see, are all hypothetically nice. The however is what checks and balances, what guardrails, what self-replenishing or what is there to keep it on the guardrails?
Well,
And what is there to stop any kind of governing body to have too much power over the people?
well, this is where we again kind of go back to the American angle, the Constitution. we have a bicameral legislator, right? The
Well,
Senate,
continue. So you're
we
speaking of
have the
American
Supreme
government.
Court and the executive. Those checks and balances have basically ceased to exist because of things like the imperial executive that we had during the Cold War, the three-letter agencies, the corporate power, all those things going to unholy directions. So what we would try to do is go back to our something like the American separation of powers with essentially the communists acting like the infrastructure party, more like a glorified think tank that provides like, okay, we would have here's some power at a subsidized or semi-subsidized rate, or intellectual property development, or into open source hardware and software development. Because again, to backtrack towards the early 20th century, have you ever heard of Dr. Sun Yat-sen?
I don't think so.
He was the guy who ended the last dynasty of China. He was
No.
the so he's actually a really interesting figure because he was the second revolutionary Christian in Chinese history. The first one was the Taiping Rebellion in the 1850s. Uh, that
Okay,
was something
forgive me.
that
Where were you going with this, though?
basically towards the influence that the American Constitution had on the communist system in China. Sun Yat-sen
Oh,
was never able to. He wanted an American style, like a bicameral legislature, but the way he kind of envisioned it, there would be like a national assembly, but kind of a bureaucracy or an infrastructure party, for lack of a better term, that would handle a lot of the infrastructure. Because it kind of mirrors the old Confucian system with the different ministries that would manage things. It was the kind of the Chinese take on the American system. Sun Yat-sen was never able to see it, nor was his successor Chiang Kai-shek, because he was too busy being a corrupt warlord at the time. But this was very popular among the masses of people in China and inspired Mao and the Chinese communists. So the Chinese do have a national legislature called the National People's Congress that acts to kind of counter the Communist Party on a lot of domestic issues. So they do have a Supreme Court and stuff like that. The Communist Party largely just does things like land management or forestry, or essentially doing longer term projections of key industries. But getting
okay.
back to
So
our case, we would probably do something at least a bit more decentralized, because right now ACP is just we're just theorizing on possible implementations. We don't actually have power or anything like that. We're just doing science fiction effectively. But
so I have a question.
mhm.
Well, let me bring that. Okay. So do I agree that the United States has some big problems with the government right now? That I'm just gonna leave it at that. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Um, so communism has been a hot mess for the last 150 years.
Well, communism as we portray it in the West. But what was there before in each case? We've largely had essentially the after that idiot Gorbachev, we've had he was largely a revisionist, as we would call him. After Stalin, we had a bunch of essentially bureaucrats, the people who embody all the negative traits of communism, stagnation and stuff like Khrushchev, Brezhnev, and so on, who were basically upset, who were basically had mistaken ideals about they could deal with the West and the West would respect them, as opposed to just the grim realities of geopolitics. They began doing a lot of very stupid moves, stagnate instead of advancing new methods of production, new types of industries, new artificial intelligence and computer technology. They began proliferating all the bureaucracies at the expense of genuine productive and scientific advancement. Whereas the Cultural Revolution was actually a kind of reaction, a Great Awakening analogy, if you will, to that Soviet educated bureaucrat class. Because they flushed their bureaucrat class and humiliated them. That's why they kind of went with Deng Xiaoping, trying to essentially try to harness corporations or restructure the state-owned corporations in more of like the open market model. I know markets and capitalism are often conflated in the West, but using stock Western methodologies to advance the productive forces, even through organizational structures and experimentation, is something that often gets overlooked because a lot of people over here don't know how to categorize the Chinese model. I know we discussed it briefly, but Singapore they often take credit for being the guys who gave Deng Xiaoping a lot of his ideas, depending on who you believe. But arguably, Singapore is a better example of corporatism than Mussolini or Uncle Addy, because Singapore uses corporations and foreign capital to build up their domestic economy and living standards without the need for the aggressive war. So that's kind of the difference between the Axis powers corporatism and kind of the sadly the Western models that we are much more controversial, shall we say. But getting back to China and communism, a lot of people over here say China is not communist because they have corporations and stuff that superficially resembles a lot of what we have. But two-thirds of their economy is still state-owned via their like a public central bank, because they're kind of using the American system from the 19th century with their own local twist to it. So that's kind of the argument I would make. So if we learn from that, or we even if we go back to the American system of the 1800s, like the Hamiltonian and Lincoln's model, and what kind of came from that, that would just be a something that is objectively to the conventional left of what we have now, with just a financialized neo-feudal dystopia.
The walls have closed in here. They have closed in. Let me ask you something.
Mhm.
Let's just throw four things out there. Socialism, communism, fascism. Let's say in terms of like what Germany did, because fascism exists in different ways on different sides of the aisle, whether people want to believe it or not. That
Mhm.
argument is stupid if you don't realize that. And that what I say, socialism, communism, fascism, let's say classic right wing, and then capitalism. Okay, you do a great job of extolling virtues relating to communism, but I would like you to tell me in what ways socialism, fascism, right wing, and capitalism work, or what you like about those.
Well, Marxists would define capitalism and socialism kind of as stages of political organization. Capitalism referring to the initial expansion of a new market. Uh, Kind of classical, went with the classical liberal era, like the 1800s or so. Socialism is the political organization or regulation, or lack therefore of a market once it's kind of matured. By matured, we mean once a few players have kind of dominated all other actors, or if, or it's kind of settled down. There's that initial dynamism of new markets. That's kind of what geopolitically can be capitalist as well. Like the colonial empires back in the day is a not very pleasant example. But once they've kind of built up their own industries, and they have their own government that either regulates the hell out of them, controls them, or just lets them do what they want, that is still a form of socialism, just not in the sense of like command economy like we stereotypically think of it.
Okay,
But
but
getting back to fascism,
yes.
or national fascism, at least as Leninists would describe it, is not the 1930s model of the Axis powers. It refers to the openly terroristic dictatorship of financial capital. So BlackRock and canceling people socially can be a form of that just as much as Mussolini and friends. Now, I would say that Mussolini's model is what we would technically call corporatism, the merger of
Okay, but
state.
hold on.
Sure,
Can we make this a little simpler for the
sure.
sake of talking like this? Because you do a very good job of providing tremendous detail and historical context. Let's just look at this from a real simple terms. Give me like a few bullet points of each one of those things where you like each one of those things. I'm not trying to set you up. I'm literally just having a
All right,
conversation. I'm curious because for you to have the thoughts that you do, you must have given consideration to the others as well, I'm guessing.
sure. What I would say here is that each of these bullet points, if we treat them like we do stereotypically, that's still different than the Marxist definitions or the philosophical definitions I expounded on. But to kind of go through the superficial version real quick, for capitalism, what's great about that is mobility, equality, and dynamism. For the and when and socialism, you
Was
have
your
the
second word
ability,
equality, mobility, equality, and dynamism, you said?
yeah, essentially
Okay.
because it is pure meritocracy where the rubber meets the road in the car factory.
Hypothetically. Okay. And
But
the others.
socialism, that's when you have the road system to begin with, because having a private actor building their own infrastructure can be quite cost prohibitive. Not everyone's going to have a Jeep. And likewise, you're still going to need someone to make sure that there is that the Jeeps don't all fall apart when you drive them, at least from the consumer. That more
Yeah.
the Dennis Kucinich angle. Fascism, that might be you outsource the Jeep production to a country to somewhere else, assemble the parts here at and essentially jack up the price by 100 orders of magnitude, so you can buy it for a 50-year car loan. Whereas communism might be you essentially make sure the decimal point moves in the other direction for cost, and you still have a line of Jeeps. People can still buy them and drive them around, uh, customize them, and when someone comes up with a new model that's darn better than what you have, the government's interested in and treat and just buys it like another client.
Okay. And fascism.
Well, fascism, as I mentioned, is when you outsource production of the Jeeps to a country where they have slave labor and basically jack up the price with a few orders of magnitude on it, and the person has to buy the Jeep with a 50-year car loan.
I, th- Forgive me. I'm only asking. I'm not. That's how you exemplify fascism
Well,
in a right
essentially,
wing.
it is the terroristic dictatorship of finance capital because
Well, it's
the
government
interest,
regulation of industry and forcible suppression of political opposition, for one thing.
yes, because and likewise the excessive financialization of things. Because I know we were discussing Germany in the 1930s, but Hitler did not tell the banks to go F off. He paid the bank the UBS, the Bank of Switzerland or whatever, Bank of Universal Settlements, even until after he croaked and unalived himself. So he did that till his last moments.
So here's something that I'm kind of picking up from listening to you right now, and this is not a setup. It would appear to me that in your thinking that aspects of all of those, communism, capitalism, socialism, fascism, are bound to, I hate to use the word rear their head, but they are bound to pop up at different points in histories of all civilizations as they go
Correct.
through their natural waves and growth and struggles.
Correct.
Um, but you find yourself um, most uh, sitting with and resonating with communism then.
Yes. And I would make the
Okay.
argument that
So,
what we have right now is already fascism because the
oh,
petrodollar system that we set up in the 70s relies on debts and war and genocide that we subsidize. It sends our money
right.
abroad while our veterans unalive themselves over here.
Yeah, well, you're not wrong. Both the Democrats and Republicans have been acting very fascist in the last while. In fact, I was saying that basically in the last 4 or 5 years with the Democrats, I'm like they're already meeting requirements of fascism already.
Well,
And the
I'd
fact
argue
that,
that the Democrats are to the right of the Republicans.
oh, that's fascinating. In what way do you quantify that?
Well, let's go back to our 1930s examples. Who were the people who supported Benny and Addie? It was their version of the professional managerial class. Sure, there was popular support, but only after the professional managerial class, the corporate managers, the government bureaucrats, the career mediocrities, the kind of like today's HR Karens, basically. They were the ones, or in World War One context, a lot of it was the incompetent officers who would force all the conscripts to go charge in the machine gun nest while they're sitting back drinking, getting drunk. And Imperial Japan too, by the way, because literally in World War II, the Imperial Japanese Officer Corps would be drinking sake while sending all their enlisted guys to the Banzai charge the machine guns.
That's kind of human nature. But forgive me, and I think I missed this, so excuse me. What point or what were you bringing that up with regard to
Well,
again?
my point was that at least in the last election cycle, the Democrats were to the right of the Republicans because they were basically more favoring war and repression of domestic civil rights. Now the Republicans, of course, do the same thing. It just
I see the point you're making. However, that's where I use it as an example why I don't like the terms right and left.
I
And it's so
know.
one-dimensional that it's not even like I would actually in that circumstance sig um, propose to not use that point because I think it dilutes us while we're here talking about the shadows in the wall and Plato's cave that we're stuck in at the moment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
To step out of the cave at all, let's just call it the uniparty.
Yes. Well, and I have an
Well,
observation of that to
the
share.
uniparty, at least, every basically the uniparty, by definition, the status quo, that would conventionally be quote unquote right, and everything outside, quote unquote, left. At least if we want to go by very vulgar
Ooh,
definitions.
interesting. That's an interesting
So
theory. So you're
Ron
saying that
Paul is
everything of the uniparty is the right and everything outside of it is the left?
to a point, yeah. Of course, there's going to be people
How do you see that?
well,
That's interesting. I'm
someone like
curious to
Thomas
hear how you see
Massey
it.
or MTJ or
Hmm.
Ron Paul back in the day, they were against the
MTG, you
war.
mean?
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, yeah, okay, okay. I haven't really
They
had their
voted
narrative.
against the genocides and the wars to some extent. And Ron Paul, of course, is probably the most left wing politician outside of maybe Kucinich, because he's opposing the Fed, opposing all the stupid wars, opposing all the three-letter agencies. So all of the things that fund the current imperial order.
I'm curious, why do you consider those points relating to Ron Paul as being left? Opposing the
Well,
wars, opposing, you said
the
debt, and
Fed,
then what was the
because
other one you mentioned?
the
The
Fed
Fed.
and
The
all
Fed, the
the
wars.
expansion of the three-letter agencies and stuff like that.
Why do you consider that left wing though?
Well, because at least if we want to go with the 20th century's metric, even yeah, hell, even old Karl Marx, we still can go with the
Because I
decision.
consider that universal, what
Well,
you just
at
said.
least, at
I
least,
don't put that at a party line or a wing at
sure.
all.
So at least if we want to go with our current system, where we are now, uh, opposing the superstructure, opposing the system that creates all the inequality, the neo-feudalism. That's the
Oh, I mean,
direction.
the intelligence agencies have, and the fact that they can be in as long as they can have exist and completely undermine the the nature of our American government and elected officials already.
Yeah, I know the term deep state sounds conspiratorial, but it just means the entrenched bureaucracy. Entrenched bureaucracies tend to work for the status quo. We've seen this with some of the end of each dynasty in China, right?
Right.
The government gets too nepotistic and eventually gets replaced by guys who try to start fresh.
You personally, do you see the left and people that associate with the left, or shall we say the Democrat Party, specifically wanting to end the Fed, take the power away from the government agencies, and oh, my brain stopped working. What's the other one
Uh,
that I said was
and
universal? Oh, end
the
the
wars,
wars.
the Fed, and the three-letter agencies.
And you see that as being more of a Democrat or left-wing thing versus a Republican
Well,
thing.
I would say it's not a Democrat thing. I'd say it's left wing in the sense of the unit opposing the uniparty.
Okay.
The uniparty generally has its interest to reinforce and expand because it's like that quote, the iron law of bureaucracy, if you've heard of that,
The iron law of
of
bureaucracy, you
bureaucracy.
say? I don't think I've heard that said. What do
Basically,
you know?
the short version is that every bureaucracy will try to expand to until it because it means more money and more job security. There's a guy, Clay Shirky at NYU, who said it is every institution's interest to preserve the problem for which they were created to solve because it's career security. So
Yeah,
the,
that's a big problem where our whole everything breaks down. Yes. Forgive me, that got me sidetracked just thinking
so
about
we are
that.
basically becoming the parody of the Soviet Union in the 20th century that we just got there via BlackRock and Wall Street speculation as opposed to the hammer and sickle method, shall we say.
If we go back a few steps to when I asked you what were like three bullet points of what you see of value to socialism, communism, fascism, classic right wing, and then capitalism.
I can do the classic right wing though. Uh, Classic right
Well,
wing.
it's just because that's where people define it. But the fact of the matter is, if you, so, I've bought every major dictionary since the
Mhm.
mid 1800s, and it's easy. It's interesting to watch the definition of words change, um, because they do
Well, you
change.
certainly turned the page on it.
Yeah. Well, the modern dictionaries, both we'll just say the modern dictionaries, they're a lot smaller. And what's frightening is I find the best dictionaries that actually define words for the mechanics of the words and then don't give you unasked for context the way AI tries to keep you on the guardrails is more of the dictionaries post World War II, like 1950s, 60s.
Mhm.
And then from that point, they start changing. and one is the definition of fascism.
Mhm.
If I should have, I wish I had my dictionaries here right now. But if you look up the definition of fascism in the modern dictionary, it just says a authoritarian type of government that is right wing, and that's it. And then they compare it to Nazis. That's it. They don't actually tell you what it is or how it works at all. To where I give the equivalent of that being that if in the dictionary they were to say a car, it would just say a method of transportation that pollutes. It's like, whoa, not only did you not actually tell me what it is at all, you also put context on it that I didn't ask for. But if you look in the dictionaries from like the 50s and 60s, the big thick ones, it actually gives you a full definition of the mechanics of fascism, things like government regulation of industry, forcible suppression of political opposition, and it goes on. And it actually tells you what it is without providing a specific context in that way. So forgive me, I got way overly sidetracked, but that's why I wanted you to tell me what you thought was positive in those other things. But may I do this? And just tell me if I'm kind of on the right here with you or not, or kind of picking up and resonating. It seems to me that in looking at your observations with the world at large, as well as history, and where you personally fit in with what you resonate with, and we've agreed that fascism, communism, socialism, communism are all constructs, and the variabilities of them just come and go through the ebbs and flows of human civilization through the years. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
But you especially resonate with communism more.
Yes.
Um, do you think, in a manner of speaking, it's fair for all of us to say that we're going to relate to the thing where embodies our values at the times and what we want to most see now that we think would be ideal? Do you think that's a fair statement?
Yeah, because we are creatures of the material world. If something is
True.
materially going to show, like if someone comes along with some completely new political ideology, but they're handing out, again, Star Trek gadgets for free to everyone, they're going to get a lot of fans overnight, regardless of what it is.
Yeah, it's all it's what the Pavlovian treat, is it?
Yep. Now, of course, a lot of political systems are always going to be trial and error. A lot of countries, well, I know there's always the communist famines that are brought up, but a lot of times these countries are trying to reorganize their agriculture, trial and error, emphasis on the error, shall we say, uh, because they want to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. So, but a lot of times, let's just say that values can be the amount of error can be overstated depending on your source. But
True. So,
getting back to the trial and error, even our own Constitution, back in the day, no one had tried a constitutional republic of the modern form yet, right? So during the American Revolution, the neoclassicism, the appearance to older traditions, like Moses, Confucius, and Solomon on the Supreme Court, it's like they're grounding themselves in established traditions and philosophies to show a continuity with the past. So whatever comes next must show some form of continuity with what came before.
well, and the other thing about that is it's almost impossible not to even accidentally have continuity with things that have happened before.
Yeah,
Because I hate to say like everything's been tried, but everything's been tried. The biggest difference of what's happening today, the simplest and biggest difference is the instantaneousness of connection with the internet, and the advent of AI coming, which is hard to predict. It's interesting. So you resonate with communism of the four things we talked: communism, socialism, fascism, capitalism. Um, you never asked me where I sit.
well, where do you stand?
I'm going to answer that question in the best way I know how. And that is simply this: I'm tired of effing labels. And I don't mean that as a cop out, because I know people would want it to be. I am deeply tired of labels because all we're doing is creating political tribalism and fighting. And the thing about that is, with the nature of the internet age now, the obviously with the social media and the ability to program and guide rail and push people around, and the nature of the algorithms, dude, like X as an example, as a platform, is just vitriol mudslinging. It's hell. It is social hell, period. And there's a reason for that. That's how they garner engagement. Each platform wants to keep you on there and keep you fighting, keeping you engaged. Well, that is a reflection of human nature. The algorithms are that. They're using human nature effectively against us to keep us addicted and fighting and on there because it creates power for the people that have the social media platforms.
Yep.
Period.
Just like the
So
age of yellow journalism. It's like, remember the Maine, William
it is
Randolph Hearst, manufacturing the Spanish-American War.
fair. And I brought up yellow journalism a time or two in my videos, but so few people know what that is that I don't want to say it falls on deaf ears, but oftentimes I'll say something I think is really clever and few people get it, but I'm glad they do. Um, so the reason I say I don't like labels is because you basically just sign yourself up to be part of hell when you do that right now. Now, to be fair, you have to stand for something and believe in something. So may I do this in answering your question with a lot of annoying words instead of something short? Can I tell you what I don't like about all those things?
Sure.
Well, communism's killed a hell of a lot of people. And it's destroyed a hell of a lot of beautiful things. But you know what? Fascism's caused big problems. You know, if you're going to be, but so is capitalism. And so is socialism. They've all created so many damn problems. So why have they all created problems? Well, it has to do with who was at the helm of the ship at what time. And then, not just who was at the helm of the ship, how the rest of the world views it and how it's structured for power. So all of these things are simply a reflection of human nature. Period.
Well,
And the reason, I'm sorry,
I just,
let me,
just want to say there
please.
is a very interesting philosopher you might want to look into. Have you ever heard of
Okay.
John Dewey, famous for I think the same one as the Dewey Decimal System, who's famous for a philosophy called pragmatism with a capital P?
Being pragmatism. I'm aware of that, but I'm not aware of him and it specifically.
So he's basically in agreement with a lot of the points you raised. So continue.
Yeah, and also Stoicism has a lot of values which I've learned the hard way over time, especially in mentoring and teaching and helping others. Don't read too much into that, but just take it as face value. Um, all of these things are a reflection of human nature at the time and who's at the helm and how that relates to the world at large everywhere else. Um, this will get me in trouble. Let me think before I open my mouth right now, but let me make this point. Probably the point of all evil in civilization that I can see comes through debt. Everything goes back to that. And why? Because that's where you can undermine the good intentions and nature and structure of society. Um, and that has to do with all of the upheaval and the changing of philosophies from capitalism to socialism to communism to fascism. It basically all traces itself there.
Well, to reinforce
So,
that point, you know,
what do I believe in? I hate debt. That's what
I
I
agree
believe.
with that wholeheartedly because debt, if we go back to the old definition, it wasn't just financial debt, it was moral debt. Sin
Correct. Well,
means moral debt.
the other thing is let's super simplify it. If an individual goes into debt, that allows them to do something, attain something, or just do something or attain something. It gives them the power immediately, a higher power than they would have normally, to acquire or have service. Okay, so that allows them to do that. But what are they going to accomplish with that? You know, the human lifespan is pretty short. You're only going to get to do so much. So if you take on too much without a plan that doesn't keep going, or you can't regulate your own personal debt, well, then you end up in a bad place, much worse than you would be otherwise. And that's why these federal student loans for school that you can't default on are such a horror show, because schools can take advantage of the students. They have you go into a major being debt up to your eyeballs where there's no jobs because the government's not regulating it or stepping in. Parents don't know any better. And we've all been like propagandized for so long over school. So that's a very, very bad debt. And that's a very big cultural problem because it's not being regulated. And we're destroying the future of young people and our nation and our culture before they even get the opportunity to go out there and do any, achieve anything. So there's a but that's worth a discussion that think of a woods or jungle or a garden. I don't like, let's not, I kind of don't like the idea of garden because garden is tended by people. It's already not entirely natural. But if we look at a woods like a primeval forest, okay, it has not been touched by the hand of man for ever, right? So that woods is going to find its equilibrium of nature and the natural order of all of the systems there, be it plant, animal, biologics, whether bacteria, everything, just all life there and its position on Earth in the solar system, weather, uneven heating of the Earth's surface through the sun, which creates weather, all of these things. It's going to find its homeostasis over time. It's frankly not going to change that much. It's going to very, very slowly change with the general changing of the Earth over the time of Earth. People are not good at that. We're not good at that. Our lifespans are
we're
short.
designed for much shorter time scales. Monkey see, monkey
Right.
do.
Yeah, and people are all different. They all want power. And then you have people that are, frankly, we have a scale of psychopathy, right? If you have any empathy. Empathy is key to a civilization, is key to a community, understanding your fellow man or caring. But the problem is the people that are high on the scale of psychopathy, depending on how smart they are, or what other psychological profiles come to be, and that's where you get into the kind of dark triad stuff like Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy.
Yep.
Bad traits.
Your
That ends up
DSM-5
under.
disorders.
Yeah, effectively, I'm just going to go so far as to say this: the people that have dark triad traits, depending on how far they are, if they're driven, they are they're kind of a virus. They're kind of a disease to humanity and civilization
Well, there was a
because
profile, I think, a few years ago of where they looked at what professions dark triad traits dominated in.
car
Politics,
salesman.
business, especially finance, uh, stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to go too far into it, but I truly loathe those people. And it's been a lifetime of all of the hard lessons and feelings um, to temper and forge your soul to be able to deal and combat that. So, if we go back to the forest analogy, the primeval forest analogy, and then humanity, is that the failing of humanity? The dark triad people that I said are effectively a simile or like a disease or like a virus in terms of a metaphor there for civilization? Is that where it all goes to pot? Because a reasonably community or family minded, empathetic person would hypothetically create a great civilization in any of those constructs, whether it's capitalism, socialism, communism, or fascism, hypothetically. But I guess the problem is it comes down in society. How many psychopaths do you have at any given time? And how many psychopaths are behind the helm of the ship with any of those things and then how it works? And I don't think anybody ever has that conversation.
Well,
We just
I
get
think
we
show me
just get
the
into the war of
incentive.
like which one's better.
Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the answers. Because you can tell a
Power.
system.
It's always
Yep.
power. Money is just a
Have
power.
you ever read the book Dune or seen the movie?
Yes, I have.
Well, one of the points of the book was basically like power corrupts. Beware the Messiah. Because in the science fictional context, Paul Atreides is kind of like the science fantasy Messiah of the Dune universe. But those who come after him are corrupt. So he genuinely does defeat the bad guys, the Harkonnens, and gets the girl at the end. but he basically ends up uh, unleashing a giant galactic genocide and creating an empire, one of the most ruthless empire in human history afterwards. Of course, some of the later books expand on that because there's a master plan for survival or something, but that's kind of the original point of the book was beware the Superman or a charismatic leader because even if they are start with pure intentions, eventually corrupt people will end up in the helm of any system.
Yeah, like Elon, screw that guy. Everybody thought he was great because he's the richest man in the world. The richest men in the world like to let you believe is the richest man in the world. That's who he really is. But he's so great. He's saving the environment with electric cars that have a massive carbon footprint. He basically sucked off the teat of America through the leftists to get that. Let me go on this rant here. I'll keep it clean. And but he's just going to change to the Republicans now. Now that he can use things like AI and Doge to get in every government system to get the information out for Palantir, basically for you to get more money and control through AI to do it. Now you're a Republican. Oh, and you're going to use the excuse of, oh, the left trans my kid. Oh, I'm going to be conservative now. Screw you. If you have any difficulties with your children, it's probably because you got too many baby mamas and way too many kids, and you're being a crappy dad by not spending any damn time with them. So no, Elon's not a savior. He doesn't give a damn about any man. He's just a con man. And then look at him talking about H-1Bs. Like, oh, and he's talking to England. Like, we need a more conservative government because you don't want all these illegal immigrants and Muslims coming in. Oh, he's trying to do the same thing with Germany with the conservatives. Screw him. He's just trying to cozy up to change the guard of both UK and Germany and everything else when he's perfectly fine with H-1B visas and bringing in floods of Indians and Chinese to hire at Tesla because even old Grok will out him. It's H-1Bs at Tesla saving the company $100-200 million a year because you can pay them less while destroying the American job market. So you know what? Yeah, screw these people. Rant over. But yeah,
Well,
you got to be careful of these saviors. Even
yep.
Trump was demagogic in many ways. And he's proven
Well,
himself
the
to
first
be.
one to use Trump's like fake populist style, that I would say that was Obama in 2008. He ran as a fake populist to try
Yeah, I
after
mean,
the Bush
that's
years.
probably a fair statement. Yeah. Well, tell you what, I either need to take a break and come back to this because I drank too much water, and I'll be happy to do that. Or if you feel we've had a nice talk and you want to end it, we can do that too. What do you say? What would you like to do?
Well, I have to run off to another meeting in the not too distant future.
Fair, then
So
we can wrap it up.
I will end with one very important question. Have you heard
Oh,
about the cross between the pig and the bear?
uh, maybe on a South Park episode, but no.
Well, it's a big pear. I hate to hog your
Fair,
time or be too boorish.
fair, fair. Do dad jokes come from? Is that a communist trait or just you?
That's just me. Whenever I do
Oh,
stand
okay.
up, they tell me to stand down. I hope I hit the marks.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good pun. I like that one
Well,
on marks. You know,
make sure you pay the exorcist on time, otherwise the haunted house gets repossessed.
fair. I do want to say since we're ending this, I appreciate you having on and talking about this. Um, I yeah, this has been nice. This has been fun. I would love to see everybody have, I think, conversations like this that are good, regardless of whether you feel, because these wars are just stupid. All these social political wars are just how the powers that be keep everybody down. And truthfully, I don't have good feelings towards communism. I'm trying to think for a hot second. I think the only thing in my entire house I have that's relating to communism is a little enameled pin that was put in a box and sent to me when I was buying a watch part that randomly came from Egypt. And it's like, it's got Lenin on it, and it's a thing with kids. And I took it and I hammered a nail right through the middle of it, and I hang my jackets on it. Because to be honest, I found it repulsive. But me finding that repulsive is my vantage point of history. And, the things that I've seen that I more relate to that I would like to see for a common good. But I think the commonality of all of us and you and me is it does appear that you are not a dark triad psychopath, and I hope I'm not. I don't think I am. And we at least respect each other enough to have a conversation. We would like to see everybody be better off and humanity go somewhere. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Cool. Well, hopefully everybody gets to have nice conversations like this and we figure out how to do that.
Yeah, hopefully we have some nice cars and our civil rights back.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this. I don't know. I don't. How much of a pacifist or fighter are you? And in what circumstances do you personally fight?
Well, that's an answer that we'll tell off the interview.
I'll tell mine right now. Fight or flight are both two good things, but I'm a flight more like a Navy SEAL or Baron von Richthofen would be. If you can't win it, punch out and come back to fight another day. But if you close in the walls far enough, or you try to take away the ideals or things that I most care about,
Well, for me, I'd go
I
with
will be
with,
the
with the term
I will
Fabian
be the
strategy, something I can concur with. Flank and hit him from the side,
mm, I I mean that's one way to do it.
or the
That's
way out is through.
you know what? If it's a big problem, mine's nuke the bastards.
Take off and nuke the site from orbit because it's the only way to be sure, to quote a great
Scorched
film.
earth, turn the ground to glass.
Yep.
So
So,
how about we all figure out how to get along and for us to find a commonality good thing so we don't have to do either of those two things. Your sneaky side flank attack or my scorched earth.
well, I can do frontal attacks. It depends on which martial art I'm doing at the time.
Well, you got to
Kendo,
go with
you go
what's
right
more
through.
effective.
For MMA, through for sometimes if I'm doing paintball or laser tag, then I flank them.
Fair. And we should also realize that in many circumstances, it's a mutually assured destruction, and that's far
Yep.
better, far worse off than us just having differences of opinion at any given time.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll end the interview here.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.